If you want to see just how seriously Republicans are taking their House majority, take a look at what they spent more than 8 hours doing oversight on today. No, it wasn't inflation, gas prices, prescription drug prices, or education. Instead, the House Oversight Committee decided to hold a hearing on issues that really matter to Americans, namely, why Twitter, a private company which can set its own rules of engagement, decided to restrict a link to a New York Post article about Hunter Biden's laptop for a few hours more than 2 years ago. Before it even began, the White House denounced the hearing as a bizarre political stunt. And boy, were they right. Republicans like to use the incident as an example of the government pressuring Twitter to suppress certain posts or accounts from conservative voices. Naturally, like most things with the MAGA Republican Party, the hearing quickly descended into a real-life manifestation of Twitter, filled with incoherent, unhinged, and baseless allegations untethered from reality.
Was it me that you violated my First Amendment rights? You violated countless conservative Americans. These were doctors that were trying to tell the truth about COVID, doctors that were having success treating people with ivermectin that you all would not allow to be talked about on your platform. And I'm so glad you've lost your jobs. Thank God Elon Musk bought Twitter.
I find it extremely alarming Twitter's unfettered censorship spread into medical fields and affected millions of Americans by suppressing expert opinions from doctors and censoring those who disagree with the CDC. I have great regrets about getting this shot because of the health issues that I now have.
There was no evidence of the Trump campaign colluding with Russia. There was none. It was actually fabricated by the Democrats and the Clinton campaign.
What, no horse medicine on Twitter? Ooh, despite the QAnon squealing, a few important things did come out of this hearing, thanks to the Democratic members. Russia, yes, continued to meddle in American elections as recently as the 2022 election. Twitter executives ignored warnings about January 6th. And lastly, we did learn that one administration did indeed seek to censor Twitter, that administration being Donald Trump's.
Earlier, you testified about a 2019 tweet that was about President Trump. And I think it was from Ms. Teigen. What was the tweet about?
Would you like me to give the direct quote?
Yeah.
Please excuse my language. This is a direct quote, but Chrissy Teigen referred to Donald Trump as a
Okay. Free speech. And what happened after Ms. Teigen posted her tweet? What did the White House do? What did the Trump White House do?
From my understanding, the White House reached out to ask that this tweet be removed.
Ever since Elon Musk took over the company, profitability is down and hate speech, anti-Semitism, and misinformation are way, way up, which the Republican majority didn't seem to care about at all. Joining me now is freshman Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congresswoman, first of all, my apologies for the amount of time that's being wasted in this committee talking about things like Hunter Biden's laptop. But I would love for you to recount for us how much time was spent on this Hunter Biden's laptop story and how sincere you think Republicans are about this, or did you get the sense that it was a performance?
So I lost count. I just know that it was way too much time. I do appreciate Katie Porter, who outlined, how much time we were spending working on this versus the amount of time that this post was actually down. There basically was about the same amount of time, which absolutely makes no sense. But I think that the Republicans, again, are going to do our jobs for us. They are showing the American people who they are and what they care about. And they care about conspiracy theories and nonsense. They do not care about you as people. They do not care about truth. They do not care about transparency. All they want to do is now use their majority to effectuate their individual issues that they have, as you heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene as well as Boebert. We know that both of them are nothing but walking human beings that don't know the truth if it slapped them in the face. So they were upset about their personal Twitter accounts. We should not be using federal funds, federal time to deal with their personal issues, but seemingly that's what we will be dealing with this Republican majority, and that's why it is imperative that the Democrats take the House back.
I think for a lot of people, they became accustomed to the Oversight Committee being a sort of a show, being a kind of a clown show that Republicans would use as the channel for whatever their grievances were, right? They would take that committee, and you had heroic Democrats like the late Elijah Cummings who would counter them and sort of try to shut down some of the nonsense. But you're right. It does feel like now the purpose for the Republicans on the committee is their own personal grievances with losing their Twitter accounts or having their Twitter accounts banned, usually for saying things that were violent or that were conspiracy theories, or still refighting the last election, the last presidential election. Was there anything, did anything come up in the oversight hearing today that was about Americans' current pragmatic, practical problems? Things like drug prices being so high, the things like President Biden talked about, cable news companies overcharging folks. Like, there is a lot to do oversight on.
Yeah, if anything came up that was relevant and pressing for the American people, it came from the Democratic side. Obviously, most people know me because of my fight around voting rights. And so definitely I wanted to talk about democracy and the threat that is presented to democracy and how that threat has been presented via Twitter, and how a lot of those threats to democracy have actually led to political violence. If we're going to have a conversation about social media and the harms, then we need to talk about actual harms, not hurt feelings, right? That's what we dealt with today, was hurt feelings versus actual harm. We definitely made sure that we asked those representatives from Twitter or former representatives about January 6th, about the warning signs, about the things that should have been done. And, you know, there were great suggestions. There was a suggestion that we look at providing some bills around maybe what members are allowed to do, those government actors, because it doesn't make sense that we had a former twice impeached president that was inciting nothing but fear, hate, and obviously violence. And so he should have had a higher level that he was going to be held to, along with the likes of a Boebert or the likes of a Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so they talked about that. And that's actually where the policy reform should stand. But they didn't want to talk about real issues that are pressing right now in this country, even as it relates. They didn't even want to go to bullying. We could talk about bullying in social media. We could talk about a lot of things. But talking about this, New York Post, link was not really one of those. They can't be taken seriously. And I think that they recognize that they won't be taken seriously because we made sure that we redirected the conversation to things of substance for the American people.